long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, the special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 22, Tippy Canoe and Kylo Ren 2. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello. Double deuce.
I'm already a double deuce. I'm already regretting that Tippy Canoe and Kylo Ren thing, because I don't really know.
I like it.
I don't even know what that means.
I like it. It's an old political slogan.
Yeah, because it's political season. Oh, wait, no, it's not.
Sort of.
Kind of.
Debate night, I guess.
It's open season. Yo, open season with iced tea.
That's right.
I'm hunting down
I'm
all
just
the candidates.
whatever you say at this point.
You're just going to agree.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I'm so far out of my wheelhouse. There are no wheels in this house. So let's get back on to something I know.
Is that what a wheelhouse is? What is a wheelhouse?
I thought that was where they stored the wheels.
Do you know what a wheelhouse is?
I thought it was on the tugboat with that little box.
This is bugging me. I gotta look this up.
You gotta look it up now?
Wheelhouse. I gotta look it up. I don't know why. It's like
I honestly thought it was the
part of a boat. Oh, here we go.
Yeah,
a wheelhouse is a part of a boat or ship. It's part of a boat or ship serving as a shelter for the person at the wheel. That's a wheelhouse?
Yeah.
I never knew what that thing's called.
Really?
I heard the word wheelhouse, and I've seen those things, parts of a boat or ships that serve as shelters for the person at the wheel, but I never put them together.
So you obviously have not lived in a lot of places with a strong nautical tradition.
No, I've never lived on a boat, if that's what you're asking.
No. Okay. Wait a second. You lived in New Orleans. They got a lot of boats there, don't they?
They got river boats. Those are bigger.
Oh, so you're probably more of like river boats.
They got either river boats or they got those like fan boats.
Guys with having like little doilies around their upper arms. That's more your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
It's a river boat.
Yeah.
Ah.
Solid yellow suit. Nice plaid bow tie.
Green visor.
Yeah.
Snapping those cards. They've got those cards with the edges cut off of them. It's really nice.
That's right.
Okay, I think I better get into some Star Wars.
So speaking of numbers, we are at 66 days until The Force Awakens.
I know. Jeez.
Imagine that.
It's crunch time. And finally, I made my first, specifically, comics and books notwithstanding, I made my first Force Awakens memorabilia purchase this weekend.
What's that?
Oh, I bought a blanket at Costco.
You've been threatening to.
It's a fleece blanket with Kylo Ren and some of them First Order troopers on it. And to be perfectly honest, it doesn't look as nice as the Darth Vader one that I bought a month ago. It's kind of mushy. It's hard to silkscreen microfiber. I guess that's everything is made out of microfiber now.
Yeah, it is. Well, what are you going to use? Macro fibers?
That's right.
What is this, 1991?
Yeah, exactly. That's all we had. Back in high school, we'd just have to sit on those macro fiber seats on the bus. Gosh, I'm thinking about microfiber. I'm like, wondering what's it'd be like a shirt that looks like it was made out of wheat thins or something. Not wheat thins, I'm sorry, Triscuits. God damn it. It would have been way better if I
knew what you meant.
Like,
one of them hair shirts, I guess.
Yes.
I
also
I guess certain kinds of wool is a kind of hair shirt, I suppose.
That is true. The hair shirt that proves that you are pious before the Lord. What the heck is going on? I knew I was gonna be off today. I knew that there was something. I woke up.
No, we're just getting warmed up,
and I'm like, there's something so wrong about me.
66 days until The Force Awakens.
I bought a blanket. I saw some.
Robert has bought some memorabilia.
I saw some
memorabilia.
I saw some figures. I finally saw some actual action figures, like, single action figures, not 2 for packs, at a Target. I didn't buy them. I resisted the urge because I realized I didn't want to spend $10 on toys.
Which ones were they?
I saw 2 Rays, 2 First Order Stormtroopers, and a Finn. Not a snow Finn. Not the one with the little dusting.
The husky Finn.
The husky Finn. They put a little bit of snow on his jacket.
The gout Finn.
Exactly. And an innumerable amount of, what are those things called? The toys that we really hated, the ones that blast apart.
Oh, the hero mashers.
No, the hero mashers.
No, everywhere I've gone, they're well stocked with hero mashers, which means I don't think anyone is buying them.
I'm thinking about in 6 months, I'm going to go and get them all at the end cap, and I'll use them to insulate my house or something, because there's going to be a lot of them. I actually thought to myself, it's like, hey, maybe I should pick up. We were making like a gift bags for my nieces to send in the mail, and I was like, oh, maybe I should get them something like this. And I'm like, I just don't think they need toys the arms come off. They're not going to understand that. So I just stuck with the old standby Pez dispensers and stickers.
Sure. Yeah. So we got some more information about this movie. And there are a couple different numbers floating around, but these seem to be the most reputable. But we're looking at 136 minutes. So 2 hours and 16 minutes for this movie, which puts it...
That's about...
probably right. That's about average, I think.
Yeah, that's about Empire Strikes Back long, I think.
Yeah. And then in the UK, it looks like the UK, whatever their film board is or whatever, they gave it a 12A rating, which is roughly equivalent to the PG-13 here in the US, which I guess episode 3 was a PG-13.
Yeah.
All the rest have been PG. But the article also pointed out that more and more movies seem to be getting the PG-13 rating these days that you might otherwise have thought would be aimed at sort of a slightly younger audience. So maybe this just the rating has more to do with the MPAA and how they're choosing to classify things more than the actual content of the film. But I don't know. I guess we'll find out in 66 days. Yeah,
I've always thought that, at least from my understanding, the UK has been much more... a little bit more stringent on that, especially in depictions of violence and whatnot. In England, say, if you saw Attack of the Clones, they removed the headbutt scene between Jango and Obi-Wan on the Camino.
Mm-hmm.
They did that in order to secure that under 12 rating or whatever. Otherwise, it would have been this 12A rating. And I think that, studios, they sit around, they do the math, and they go, if we have this, we'll lose this much. But I honestly think if like anything below an R, which, no Star Wars movie's ever going to have an R.
Yeah.
They're pretty solid because it's such a huge franchise. I don't think there's going to be a lot of parents in these days that'll say like, oh, no. But who knows?
I know. I won't take my kid to that since they're 10.
Yeah. I mean, I could be wrong. There could all of a sudden be like, there's a new Star Wars movie, but parents aren't going to it because, there's people getting their arms chopped off. What's going on with that? It's like, it's Star Wars. You always have to have some kind of dismemberment in a Star Wars movie. I'm trying to think, is there any Star Wars movie without a dismemberment? No.
Because what about Phantom Menace?
Well, I mean, if you want to, Maul gets cut in half.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I guess when you're playing with laser swords, that's a hazard that
Yeah,
you just have to sort of take in stride.
there should be that. That the idea of like I'm going off on a tangent, but the fall of the Jedi. So the Jedi purge. I don't know what they're calling it now. So
Hmm.
like let's just make an argument because it comes up in the comics, which we probably might not get to today. But there seems to be a lot of lightsabers floating around post Order
Yeah,
66. You know
yeah.
that that's got to be a situation people are like picking those things up and they're just like accidentally like cutting legs off and
Hmm.
opening holes in their spaceships and things like
Right.
that.
Whoops. That was supposed to
Whoops.
happen.
It's probably an intergalactic epidemic in the Empire. It'd be like
Indeed.
PSAs and things like this. Be like, do not leave your lightsaber unattended. It could cause many consequences.
Yeah. A little safety video for people.
I am Sheev Palpatine. It's like, isn't that
Yeah.
true? Is his name Sheev now?
His name is Sheev. Yes, that's correct.
Do you think Darth Vader ever calls him Sheev?
Sheev? No, I don't think so. I wonder if Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker even knew his first name.
Yeah, be like
Because I think the only people who knew it that we know of are like Tarkin and I can't remember who else knows his name. But
Oh,
I mean, maybe when they're hanging out on the Death Star together, Tarkin turns to Vader and is like, "Man, what's Sheev's problem?"
yeah. Why is I heard that? I can't do a Tarkin. I can't sound that. I
Can't sound that.
I can't sound like that. All my impressions are off today. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. So, you have been busy playing Battlefront.
I
Or maybe
have.
not busy, but you've been playing Battlefront for the past week
Yeah, I
as part of this open beta. So, what's your verdict? Tell us about
well, here's the okay. Let's just
it.
we
You
set
always know a positive review starts out with, "Well,
well. Let me set the scene a little bit. They only had 3 modes of the game available and 3 maps, and I don't know. It's so you had the Walker Assault, which is a recreation of the Battle of Hoth. There was
mm,
a oh geez, it's like an escape pod. Like you have to, it's like capture the flag or something like that. And that was on Sullust, which was a planet we'd never seen
is that
before.
the cargo player mode?"
No, it's something
Okay.
different. It's like it's an escape
Okay.
pod circa, A New Hope crash lands on Sullust, and then you
Hmm.
have to claim it and like hold it off from defenders for
Gotcha.
approximately 3 or 4 minutes. And then there's one
Gotcha.
as a survival mode, which I think takes place on Tatooine or something. It wasn't a familiar it was kind of a desert planet. So it was kind of but it was more of like your Arizona type desert, a lot of rock outcroppings. And that one is basically you're playing by yourself against the computer, and they just send you waves of increasingly difficult stormtroopers, and then you basically fight them as long as you can hold out with your
Hmm.
weapons, and then you get points. And
Hmm.
I mean, my first blush response is that I was pretty much overall disappointed. It's not what I thought it was going to be. I honestly thought it was going to be because it was Dice, the Swedish
Hmm.
company, that they were going to kind of use the gameplay that they've refined over the years in the Battlefront series, which is I'm repeating from other weeks, but it's their version of Call of Duty. It's a more complex, and I don't want to say realistic because it's not. There's a lot of concessions to having it be a game, so it's not like a
Hmm.
war. It's not like war simulation.
Hmm.
It just felt very like dumbed down. Like there's not a lot of room for developing a play style or whatever. I mean, I think what I like about the Battlefront games is that when you first start it, you're just completely lost as to what to do, and then over time you learn strategies, and then you start to learn about unlocking things because they have a litany of weapons that you can unlock over time. You're not just starting the game with the most powerful weapons of all time, and then over time you can add a scope. You can add, your scopes are better, or you can add armor. You can add different types of explosives, and all this is broken up in 4 different soldier types. What Battlefront has done is they kind of basically, there's like, you're either a stormtrooper or you're a rebel. And now there's a lot of it that they said, oh, not available in beta. So maybe this will be a something that is revealed as time goes on, but I kind of feel like it isn't, because a lot of stuff like the jetpack, which we were talking about, it unlocks at a certain level, but after that, it's like a boost. It's like a power up, so you can jump across the map, but then you have to wait like another 2 minutes before you can do that again. And thermal detonators, and they're all like mapped to hotkeys on your controller. And it's not, and so you're the whole concept of interacting as part of I don't think there's even squads in this. I think you can only partner up with like one other person, at least on Walker Assault. And because I wasn't playing with anybody I knew, it would just partner me up with someone, and I wasn't. Right. I never heard anybody talk, so I don't know if they haven't.
You didn't hear anyone complain about noobs.
Yeah, right. There was no voice over internet protocol or whatever, so you could hear other people play. So there wasn't a lot of interaction. So what happened is the game just became like a free-for-all with people just running willy-nilly all over the map, which always happens in these kind of games. But even more so, it just felt like the refinement. Like, you could shoot people, you have your reticle, which is your aiming crosshairs, and you could be all the way across the map. And if you just happen to be walking and your reticle lights up red, that means it's like, oh, you actually have someone in your target. You could just start shooting, and conceivably you could be killing enemies that you never even saw. So it's be like, and then same thing would happen. I'd be playing, running to where the battle is, and then all of a sudden I get shot, and then they'll show you who shot you, and it's like someone on the other side of the map, and they're not even using like. I mean, that usually is kind of reserved for later in the game when people start unlocking sniper scopes. And with the sniper situation, usually that player would be kind of cloistered away on the map, hiding in a building. And that's how they like to play the game. This game just doesn't seem to reward you for any kind of anything other than just running. Because the deaths are really cheap. You can get hit, and then it'll show you that your life has gone down. Oh, I'm at 3%. You could go. All you have to do is kind of disengage, and over time your life will come back. And so there's no incentive for, like, in a Battlefront game, people can throw you health. And then so it works on this team, and then you get points for giving. If someone takes the health, then you get points, and then it builds up. So that whole aspect of the game has been either completely nerfed or just removed. So there's respawning or rejoining the game. You can do after your character dies, and you die a lot. I mean,
yeah, you
die. I was on and it, like I said, it always takes time for me to kind of get find my bearings in these kind of games, but on average I would die like 15 times around. And I'm no great example of it, but I was seeing people that were doing well, and they were still dying 8 or 10 times. So it's and also like the integration of vehicles is very poor. And I keep comparing it to Battlefield, but the point is, it was made by the same company. So I kind of thought maybe the refinement and their expertise in this would pay off, and it really doesn't. It's like you can shoot at us. You could literally take down a TIE fighter with a hand weapon as it flies over, and to me that just seems ridiculous. And when you finally get into the Walker, the 8 what is that? Which one is the AT-AT? Is that the one that's
Uh-huh.
before, like, it's so slow and so sluggish that you're just like, a lot of times you're like, this is not even fun. It's like you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of, maybe you can shoot at somebody because you can't, the zoom in function on all the weapons, even like hand weapons and like long range, they're all, it's, the aim on it is just so bad.
Really?
There's a button where it's like, you get in this habit of when you play these games, it's like, if you really want to, you can either shoot from the hip or you can like use your scope. And you get in that habit of of just hitting that left plunger button and going to your scope when you're on a field. So when you come across an enemy, you can actually hit them. This thing, it doesn't matter if you use it or not. Your aim is pretty much the same. And if anything, going into that scope mode will expose you for that half a second that it takes for your opponent to just shoot you. And so it just...
Yeah.
I mean, as I was reading a lot of think pieces over the weekend about... And not a lot of this is sourced from DICE themselves, but I think I kind of maybe I misunderstood what they were going for in this game, and I think it's really it's a casual kind of thing where basically they have to sell to such a huge base of people that I think that they couldn't make a game that was going to be, quote, hard.
Yeah.
And expect success. Now, this being said, I would say that overall, if this was a class, I would say that this game is getting a C. But I still pre-ordered it because I'm holding out hope that there'll be modes in it, as it goes deeper, that might approach my experience of what I want out of a game.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just,
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like we've advanced so much in video games and able to have a sophisticated experience for people that this seems like a real big step back. The graphics were generally, I think they spent a lot of that processing power on making it look really good. I mean, when you're on Hoth, the snow and the ice has like crystals in it, the light hits it. That's good, but then the maps themselves are very small and very limited. Like, I was all excited about, going on the Hoth base and like maybe like, going up some corridors and finding some rooms, and maybe there'll be like a back to tank you can look at, or because like this happened last year with this Alien Isolation game, which was a game made by it was a sequel to the first Alien. It was like a stealth game. And one of the great things, even though that game got mixed reviews, people loved it because the designers went and they created something that looked almost like Ridley Scott's designs for the original ship, and you could explore it and just look around it, and like it was just amazing. Like they got it right. And this, they felt like they got it right, but where they made the mistake, everything is so small. It's like the Walker Assault was the largest map by far, and aside from the hangar, there's really nothing to it. At first, I was very excited. Then you walk around and there's doors, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe there's a door when you open it, a Wampa will pop out, like the old abandoned Empire subplot where they captured a Wampa and put it in a locked room or whatever. But there's nothing there. It's just like I don't know. I was really, really excited about this, and I have to say that overall, I was disappointed, and I can imagine it would be a fun thing for someone who doesn't really want to have to like dedicate, like I don't want to dedicate 16 hours a week trying to unlock a blaster, because all the stuff is basically you're going to get it in the first hour or 2 hours you're playing the game. So it's definitely for casual video game fans, and maybe Star Wars fans that don't play video games, but they want that experience. And I guess at the end of the day, that's a good thing, because they have to. I mean, this is going to be a big game. They, like in the industry, they call that a AAA title, And
Mm-hmm.
and since Battlefield, that series completely skipped the last generation. They didn't have anything on an Xbox or 360 or PlayStation 3. This is gonna hopefully not set the tone, but at least it's gonna be the first foot forward in this generation of video gaming. I mean, I hold out hope that Amy Hennig, who came on to Lucasfilm Gaming from Sony, who was integral to the Uncharted series, which is a well respected action adventure thing. I'm kind of hope she's kind of like the last hope that we're actually going to get some kind of something with a little bit of complexity to it. And they haven't even announced the name of that.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 2 years out.
I mean, there was an article recently as well, on CNBC.com just from the other day about Disney essentially rebooting their video game, or at least the Star Wars video game production, everything about Star Wars video games, much in the same way that they're kind of rebooting the movies and the books and everything. I mean, the article itself, I thought would talk a little bit more about what you were just saying about some of the stuff they have coming up down the pike. But instead, it's mostly focused on Battlefront. It basically just sounds like they want Battlefront to do well so that they can go ahead with other stuff. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I mean, there was a quote in there though that I didn't really understand. Maybe you would, but basically they are hopeful that Battlefront getting a good reception from people will sort of satisfy people or give people the sense that The Force Awakens is going to be good. And see, to me, in my mind, those are like two completely different things. But I mean, you have more experience with I know Star Wars video games in the last, I don't know, probably even 10 years have had kind of mixed receptions. So I don't know. I mean, do you think there's really a connection in other people's minds of like, oh, well, if Battlefront looks really good, I'm having fun playing it, that means the movie is going to be good?
Well, it's kind of, I think what they're doing is they're trying to appeal to a certain type of person that's, they like to have the whole approach to something like, oh, I like to read the book before I see the movie, or I want the soundtrack before the thing. I buy all my toys beforehand, and that kind of what do they call it, synergy or whatever. Yeah, because the prequels had a pretty rocky history with getting games. I mean, that's the whole problem, because like you can't just throw money at a video game to get it finished. Whereas like sometimes it's like, with a movie, it's like, it's a union shop. So, hey, everybody, we're getting 2 times pay. If, y'all vote on it, we're going to get this movie done on time and blah, blah, blah. We can just keep spending money. With video games, it's like, it doesn't seem like you can just power your way through and get a good product. Whereas I think sometimes movies can be totally under the gun in a production schedule, and still you can still come out with a great movie. Video games, I've never heard of a game that's like, oh, we crunched it and got it done in a year, and it turned out to be this fantastic game. What it usually means is you're going to have to lop off huge chunks of features in order to, like, well, I don't want to have to test that for 4 months, so let's just take that out. So, I mean, when Star Wars came out, there was a very well-received game, which was Episode 1 Racer, which was, I still think it's I haven't played it in a long time, but it was a really fun game to play. Like, even on my 13-inch television back in 1999, I was playing that on my N64, and loving it. And I would actually, now it'd just be horrendous to have to try to game on a TV that small. But that at that same time, they came out with for PlayStation, just the regular PlayStation and the PC, they came out with a story-ish game called The Phantom Menace that was just awful. I mean, it was kind of it was the events of The Phantom Menace done in a top-down shooter thing, and it was so boring. You would get lost, and like for 10 minutes you'd be wandering this representation of Mos Espa and being like, what am I supposed to be doing here? And you'd have to, so it was buggy as hell. And I don't even think they really pushed a game for, because by this time LucasArts was already in kind of trouble. They had already they didn't really quite know what to do with their one license that they had to work with. So it was a lot of like cheap games. And so by the time Attack of the Clones came out, now I'd be completely wrong, but I don't think there wasn't very much. There was like a couple Clone Wars type games where it was like, they were still making Episode 1 games, believe it or not. And by the time the Revenge of the Sith came, they were, well, there was a Jango Fett game, which was a mess. And there was the Racer Revenge game, which was actually a prequel to, well, I think I mentioned this, where like the whole story was that, Anakin was taking a break from his training to go back into pod racing and blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, this is... So they did one game for Revenge of the Sith that had a cinematic feel to it. And I think it wasn't a very fun game, but it sold really well because they had put in some actual video clips from Revenge of the Sith as interstitial, so everybody was buying it so they could see, like a month ahead of time, they could see this stuff. And you're like, well, that's kind of a spoiler, but I think what they're talking about, if I'm putting words in their mouth, is that maybe if the game comes out and it's what people want, then maybe it will bring that feeling to people that might be a little skittish about the future of Star Wars and going, everything's going in the right direction. I mean, that's the one addendum I would say to my review of Battlefront. If I'm being honest, if I really go back and think about playing this game versus the first two, they're completely in the same scope of gameplay. It's not like if I was I'm comparing this in my mind to Battlefield, when really, if I think about Battlefront, the gameplay was pretty simplistic on those first two games as well. So it's not like they changed it a whole bunch. It's kind of, I think there would have been a certain segment of the population that would have been very angry if they had made it more like overly complex and stuff. I guess that's just my own, what I like to play.
Yeah.
I still give it a C, though.
All right. Well, I mean, so you said you pre-ordered it, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but people who purchased the game, did you sign up for the season pass?
I did not, because
to get access to the 4 upcoming expansions. Well,
see, that's the new thing now. You pay $60 for the game, and then you pay $50 to $60 for the rest of the game.
Right.
And that's the way things are now. It's like and like most games, like I would say I buy the season pass maybe 20% of the time, maybe 10% of the time, because when I'm done with the game, it's like I'm done. But these kind of games where you just keep playing over and over and over and it doesn't have a story, season passes are good because that's how you get your access to your maps. And overall, if you're thinking like, well, I'm going to spend a year with this, it makes sense, because otherwise you'll get into a map and there'll be 3 people there because everybody's playing the Jakku map, which you get if you pre-order the game. The reason I pre-ordered is because, and this is not an ad because I hate Best Buy,
right?
But they have a program, which I won't name because I'm not giving out free ads, where if you paid ahead of time, you got 20% off all your new games. So instead of me paying $60 for a game, it was $48. And then they'll set it aside for you, and you can literally walk in and just pick it up at the counter, and you don't have to have a line. And also, they were doing a promotion. If you bought through them, you got another $10 in reward credit, which is, it's a thing where if you spend so much, it's like Kohl's Cash or whatever. If you spend so much money, you get money back. And since I buy a lot, if I'm buying a game new, I buy them almost exclusively through Best Buy. I've ended up getting a lot of money back. So much so it ends up kind of financing the next game I buy. Whereas like when I go, they go, oh, you have, when I bought this game, I bought it along with another game that's coming out the week before, Fallout, which is it's a post-apocalyptic RPG type thing. It's one of those kind of games you'll spend like 100 hours playing.
Yeah.
So between the two of that, I was able to I'm going to get $20 off a future purchase. And I already had $5 from having bought a game recently. So it got to be this thing where it's like, geez, I'm only going to have to pay, I'm probably only going to have to pay like $35 for this game. So if I get $35 worth of fun out of it, and then when this, getting to your actual question, the season pass, if for some reason there's something really great in the season, which usually it's maps, it's the
right.
If there's if I'm still playing it in 3 months, which is usually that's when the season, 2 to 3 months is usually when the season pass stuff kicks in. Then I'll buy it, and usually that's around the time of my birthday, and I go, hey, you guys want to get me something for my birthday? Get me my season pass. So I don't have to buy it because it's like you're literally. The funny thing is that with games now, since everything is you have to be connected, even if you're not playing online, you have to be connected to the internet. Because games are constantly being updated. Like you were saying about the Tony Hawk game last week is the patch is bigger than the game. That's kind of what it is. Because all of a sudden in a month after the game comes out, you'll download some huge patch and you'll find out what it was. It's all the code for the season pass stuff thrown in with the patches for all the problems that they come across on the game. Let's hope there's not a ton of problems with this game.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like I haven't read anything about any serious issues. It sounds like the gameplay itself is reasonably smooth.
Well, I heard there was some rumor, I don't know if NeoGAF is that's the message board where it's a lot of these video game gossip things start. That there was a rumor going around that this game was actually broken. That it's going to be shipped broken. And I'm just
yeah, I think we talked about that a bit last week.
And I didn't really see anything broken about it. I mean, sound would cut out here and there, but that's neither here nor there. It's a lot of that can be fixed on the day. The one thing, since it just occurred to me, I wish there was some way I could have sampled the thing. I swear there's new music in this game. That there's Star Wars music that I have not heard before. Now, either that was composed by somebody for the game, doing a John Williams style, or I was or I'm just old and I've completely forgot. Oh no, this is from this is a whole thing from this. But I swear I heard some themes, and I tried to record it, but it just didn't work. I swear there's some new music in this thing. I could be completely wrong. But it just, because it usually it's it's the Star Wars theme or it's the Empire theme, and it's just, there was a few things in there I was just like, this sounds new.
Well, that's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if they compose some new stuff for the game.
Well, generally,
but it's interesting.
Well, generally they just take it. They just take it from the movies wholesale. They don't even hire a composer because they're like, well, we already have the license to this stuff. So, maybe it's just an oversight I'm missing. Maybe they use something a little more obscure, an alternate take or something that I'm not aware of. That being said, here's a question: does this game interest you at all? I mean, I know you don't play console games.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, hearing you talk about it as something more for casual play, it actually does interest me a little more than it did before. Because we talked about this last week, or I talked about this last week. The fact that I don't really play video games consistently, or barely at all. I was very skeptical of playing something like this and going in and going up against people who have been doing this pretty consistently consistently for years and years and who know what they're doing. Like I've never even played a game like this.
Right.
You know, so I was a little wary of that experience, but the way you describe it, it sounds like it wouldn't be as bad for someone like me. I probably would still like or appreciate having a kind of like single player mode just so that I can play it by myself a little bit and maybe get my skills up a little more before joining up with other people. But
that's kind of what that what they call it, survival mode is kind of like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say maybe this game might be more in your wheelhouse than than it would be in mine. And I'm buying it because it's Star Wars and I want to have some Star Wars fun. But yeah, there's certain aspects of it that would, I think, creates an equality between gamers, because you can change if you're a person, like some people have this thing with first person shooters where they get dizzy when they have the gun, so you can actually go back to third person, which is nice. So it's like I think they're trying to please everyone. And me being kind of like, my expectations are kind of got all out of whack. And speaking of equality, here's a weird thing that I came up against that I didn't really even think of when I was thinking, is that they've already shown in the movie that there was at least one other woman at Echo Base, and they've kind of, I don't know, retconned or whatever they call it. They've added female to the game as part of the ground troops. The thing that I thought was a little surprising, I'm not even making a value, is they added female stormtroopers, to the female voices to the stormtroopers. There's nothing indicative of their armor that would say, oh, this is a woman's shape or whatever. They're all that same stormtrooper shape, but I was a stormtrooper and I got shot and it was a woman's voice going ow or whatever, making anguish, which kind of took me back a little bit, like, oh, I feel kind of bad. I don't like shooting women, but I mean, that's just a kind of a byproduct of...
I mean, I guess that's in keeping with what they're doing with the... Yeah, I guess that's in keeping with what they're doing with the canon now, where they're showing that, there are women who served in the Empire. Like in Lost Stars, you have one of the protagonists, Sienna Ree, and her roommates and everything, who are in the Imperial Academy and they're serving on Star Destroyers, even though in the movies you never see any women in Imperial uniforms. But they're making the Empire and the Imperial ranks a little more diverse. Because when Zahn came along with his first trilogy, he I guess explained the fact of the movies only featuring British white male British extras as the Empire. He explained it as like, oh well, they were prejudiced and the Emperor didn't like aliens or women or whatever, and so that's why Thrawn was out in the it wasn't wild space. What was it? Not the Outer Rim either. Whatever was between the Outer Rim and wild space. I can't remember what that was called. The Unknown Regions or something. That's why he was you hadn't heard of him because he was an alien and he was sort of pushed to, sent away, or why Admiral Dalla was, kind of out of the picture for a while. And
it's kind of funny.
And so it seems like they're like, yeah, we don't really like that. We want to go a different direction, and so having women voice actresses, voice the stormtroopers in this, I guess makes sense then.
Yeah, it does beg the question though, if the Empire is supposed to represent like the ultimate, the banality of evil, the bureaucracy of evil, the no freedom and totalitarian regime. if all of a sudden now they seem to have, they're a lot more, they're actually open
diverse and they're open to aliens.
Why are they so bad then? I mean, I don't know. I forget,
I guess it's what they do, not who they are, that makes them evil now.
I guess that's true. That's very, I would say that's very evolved for a Star Wars movie.
I guess it's the idea that, women can play all sorts of roles in this galaxy. They don't just have to be like the good guys fighting for, the rebellion. They can also be these complicated imperial figures who, maybe don't like torturing people, but also believe in a cause and believe in order and justice, and that's what they think the Empire is too. And
it's kind of interesting. It's quite a different approach from the original, the 1977 conception of Star Wars, which is very binary. It's like, well, you're either good or you're bad.
Right.
It's going to be interesting going forward to see how well that goes. I mean, I could honestly, a little bit of me kind of just takes pause, but it's like I'm open to whatever, because it's like I realized at one point it's like this is just it's what it is. But what was I going to say?
Mm-hmm.
I had something to say, and it was so smart, and it just for some reason I heard a dog bark, and it threw me off.
Somewhere a dog barks in the distance.
Oh, I hate that.
Whatever.
We
were talking about women and being in these complicated roles and not just fighting for the rebellion. This jogging.
Yeah. So just the idea that, I think I talked about this on Twitter, because I just had one of those stupid late night Star Wars thoughts, because we talk about Lucas's concept of the Emperor is Nixon. And I kind of started to realize, it's like, I don't think Lucas ever really thought that Nixon was the Emperor. I think that was just something he said to his cool friends in order to sound like he wasn't just making a fun space movie that, they're like, oh, George, what, like, look what's going on in the world. Why don't you make something that comments on the political scene? He's like, I am actually. The Empire is Nixon. And that's because, Tolkien really always, a lot of people love to say that, Lord of the Rings was brought forth of his experiences in World War I and it being at the Battle of the Somme. And he, to his dying day, said, Lord of the Rings is not what's the word?
Yeah.
It's not an allegory. And I started to think that maybe Star Wars, at least in its intention, that he never meant it to be an allegory. I mean, he used a lot of good ingredients to create a story. So of course you're going to have to. It's always going to touch on things that have been around since civilization. But it's like, and if you go back to what the Empire of Dreams documentary that came with the special edition DVD set, the one that was produced for AMC or whatever, and Bill Moyers said something on kind of interesting, and the narrator talks about the what the scope of what the landscape was like in the mid 70s, about gas crisis, the end of the horror that was Vietnam, the cynicism brought forth of the highest office in the land, that man stepping down in disgrace because he was basically even against his own protestations, he was a common criminal. He basically he said, I want something done, go break into that hotel, and so there was a cynicism in the air. And and then Star Wars, which was like this wide-eyed, almost childlike, almost dumb kind of take on good and evil. It at least for a short, from 1977 to let's say 1981, kind of hit the zeitgeist in this way that probably will never be repeated. And I wonder if that's what they're going in with. We're like, we can't recapture 1977. So maybe if we, how we do it is that we touch on these cult. We don't deny that that things in the culture are changing and that the world is changing. Whereas Star Wars was kind of one thing, like, let's just pretend that, like, we all agree that there's only good and there's only evil. You know? So it's like they're nuancing it, or maybe it might not work because they're like, you know, we're just getting to the, you know, was it 14 years after 9/11 and a war and, you know, economic stuff, the 2008 crash and all this stuff. Maybe people need something brainless. I don't know. It's one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's right because I've read a couple of things. I guess it's, you know, how Star Wars conquered the galaxy, and then in there's like a short. I don't even know if it's really, if you could say it's a biography of George Lucas, but it's there are these slim series of books called Master of Cinema that are put out by some like French publisher, and Katrina Longworth, who's a writer, film critic, she wrote one on Lucas, and she makes a similar point, which is that, you know, he was very shaped by Vietnam and what you were talking about, like this cynicism and this kind of, you know, he didn't like Nixon, and there is something very kind of Reaganite, Reagansonian about the original trilogy, in particular A New Hope, where it's kind of like, yeah, I want to get rid of all that cynicism, and I want to, you know, have people have a good time.
It's a new America. It's morning in America.
Right. You know, I want people to have fun going to the movies, and, you know, here's something that I think will be fun, and even, you know, citing, you know, basically shot for shot remaking World War II, you know, battles, dogfights as part of, when everyone felt good about being American and war is fine.
Or a shot for shot remake of a Nazi propaganda.
Well, we'll sidestep that for now. That doesn't fit my thesis. So
okay, sorry.
But you know, so there was something about that idea. But then when he got to the prequels, he swung back the other way. And I mean, his ideas about politics are very cynical, in part because they're so simplistic. And like the whole message of those movies is like, oh, politics are bad. You know, the Jedi got in, you know, the politics, you know, ruined, you know, those things and
squabbling delegates.
Yeah. Right. And the master politician was Palpatine, and he used it for evil. You know, it like swings back the other way into like the pure cynicism about politics in a way that doesn't really capture what politics is about. And, you know, so I guess you kind of see that reflected, not entirely, but you see that reflected a little bit in the casting and in what ended up being reflected in the U. I mean, I don't want to take this too far because, you know, obviously the original trilogy, the Imperial officers were mostly, you know, white British guys, because if you hire out extras in the 1970s, like that, and you're in England, like that's probably who's going to show up. That's who you're going to get. I don't, maybe they did explicitly, you know, winnow out any people of color or anything like that. But certainly from a gender perspective, like I'm pretty sure that's just who was showing up for these kinds of things in the 1970s in England. Whereas then in the 2000s, or I guess the 90s, when he was making the prequels, you know, he made them more diverse, but there wasn't an empire then. So he got around it, or he was like, okay, well, they're all clones. So that kind of takes care of it from that aspect. And there was more diversity in terms of gender and aliens and even for, you know, kind of humans with it for race and everything. And so now I guess maybe we're progressing to the next, maybe a middle ground and maybe a more pragmatic or realistic view of these things, which is like, yeah, women can work for the empire and they can, you know, command these big instruments of death and be evil. And yeah, of course. And yeah, you could have black stormtroopers. Why not?
Right.
Because isn't that more sort of true to our own experiences? So yeah, it's yeah, I think that's certainly being reflected now in the in the I still don't know what to call it, because it's the EU I think of as the legends, but
Right.
they haven't really come
Yeah.
up with a better term for
There's
like
there's
all
that.
of the canon stuff that's not the
Well,
movies.
that's the weird thing. It's like Lucasfilm has kind of thrown that out, and they act like, oh, it's all equal, and it's like, well, I think they're gonna
What do we
find
call the things that aren't the movies?
right other
I guess we
media.
just call them the books and the video games and the comics.
I think they're, and I
Um,
think as time goes on, they're going to have to backtrack some of that, and they are going to be like, oh, there's going to be movie level canon, there'll be book canon, because I just don't think
yeah.
it's sustainable. I mean, I think I like what you're saying, because it does kind of make you realize, like, well, maybe they're taking a little more time and care, and even with the prequels, it's like if you look at the casting of people of color or whatever, a
Mhm.
lot of it, like the first one is filmed in England, and so yeah, there's a lot of English actors. Well, then they move the next two over to production, and the production over to Australia, and so then therefore it's like Tamura Morrison and the guy who plays oh gosh, Typho, was that it?
Mhm.
and and a lot more like people that are Australian or Maori, I guess is the
Mhm.
proper term. But you always kind of wonder. It's like, oh, did Lucas do that? Did they do that because that's the pool they had, or are they trying to are they trying to like create a sense of exoticism, which in its that's a condescending concept when you're doing a sci-fi movie and you're like, let's get the Maori guy to play
Mhm.
the evil bound. I mean, you can second guess this stuff forever, but yeah,
Yeah.
it does feel like in the casting now, it kind of seems more. And the word exotic is not right. It seems more natural.
Yeah.
It just seems like, yeah, like I guess I'm just repeating what you said, and it's just this idea that it's like, well, this is just it doesn't even matter. It's not horrible to
Mhm.
mention it, but
Mhm.
in the grand scheme of things, it don't really matter. And I guess that's really
Right.
probably how it should have been all along.
Well, and I wonder too if, when you do sort of what, I don't want to put it all on Zahn, but because the other writers joined up with this too. But when you do it how the EU had it initially, where okay, all of the Imperials were white guys, except for the one or two characters that we think are interesting or that we want to create ourselves. Oh well, that's how they want it to be, and so then these other characters who aren't in the Empire, they can be whatever we want them to be. That makes it almost makes like then their race or their gender a bigger part of their identity as a character,
Yeah.
even when it doesn't necessarily have to be, right? Because then Admiral Dalla, being a woman, you could easily have written that story without her being a woman, but the fact that someone at some point, Zahn or whomever, decided that like, oh no, all the Imperials are supposed to be men, and she's like this exception who was she the one who was in the maw? I can't remember.
Yeah, and didn't
Yeah, she was. Yeah, right. So they stowed her away in this black hole science installation,
Yeah.
precisely because she was a woman and like she wasn't allowed to have power any other way.
And didn't she
right?
supposedly have a slightly coerced relationship with Tarkin or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. I was trying to remember who
It wasn't like a violent thing, but it was like kind of an abusive rank or something.
Yeah,
The idea that he had his
right,
eyes on her and she was
right.
like, well, I'm just going to go with this.
Yeah. So right. So then that means and I'm not arguing that like she shouldn't have been a woman. I'm precisely saying like
Right.
it was perfectly fine for her to be a woman, but the fact that they played it up so much, she was like, well, I don't, why does she have to be a woman? And I think now with some of these characters that they're creating, it's like, yeah, we can make this person have darker skin, and that's just like when we're describing the person the first time, that's how we describe her, but it's not central to the character, or it never comes up. So that's the case with Sienna, as I mentioned, from Lost Stars, where she has darker skin or whatever, and the only time it's ever mentioned is like the first time she's described when it's the author, trying to give you an image of who this character is in your mind, and then it never comes up again. So I'm actually right now I'm rereading the original Han Solo trilogy, the Brian Daley one.
Oh yeah,
and I think Fiola is the same way, where she's, I think, meant to be, if not black, she's not, fair of skin or anything like that.
right.
And yeah, it doesn't come up. It only comes up when the author is just describing the character for the first time, so that you get this image in your mind, and that it's not an issue. But then when you say, oh well, then all of the people of a certain race or gender have to be on this side. Then when you create these other characters, then you have to sort of play that up more as like a unique feature. And it's like, well,
Yeah, and then it becomes the thing.
Right. Exactly.
And So I guess as long as it's not a thing, yeah.
Well, I mean, there are ways in which it can be a thing, or maybe should be a thing, and ways in which it doesn't have to be a thing, right? Like the fact that Dala was a woman, as I said, she didn't have to be a woman. But it was just notable because they went out of their way to create this character essentially, and make her being a woman like a unique part of her character. And
and they really hammered. That was a big thing. If I do remember, they talked about it at length.
Yeah. Whereas, but it, so it didn't necessarily have to be a thing that way, but you can having it be a thing in kind of like a meta way where, like with Aftermath, there's and Lords of the Sith as well. There are openly gay characters in Star Wars now. That's great that is a thing, because then people can see those characters and maybe identify with them, or, or just sort of know that someone like them is being represented. I think it's great that it's a thing in that sense, but when it's harped on a lot, and that becomes the only, or one of the biggest defining parts of their character, that's when I think it you're all right, you can find other and better things to do with this character than just be oh, can you believe that this woman is in charge of the Imperial fleet?
Right.
Yeah. So speaking of which, there's been some casting news, some casting rumors.
Yeah.
I guess the first one I will just briefly mention is some actress who is appearing in a theater production in England somewhere put down episode 7 as as one of her credits in the playbill. Her name's Kate Fleetwood. I'm guessing her part's not going to be very large, mostly because her acting experience to this point. She played Mary Cattermole in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. I didn't see any of those movies. Do you have any recollection of that character, Robert?
No, I don't. I looked up her photos to get an idea of, maybe it's but then I realized she's probably, I was maybe first I saw her, she has very angular cheekbones, and maybe she's playing Mon Mothma or something. And I realized that the age is all wrong, and it's she's probably in her late 30s or early 40s or whatever, and it's Mon Mothma would be, in her 70s or 80s or whatever, if we figured out. I think last week we talked about this. So, yeah, I think it's just probably an indicator. It's they always, all these Star Wars movies, there's always somebody that's, handling holding a pike or something, and holding a door. I mean, if you watch the prequels, Dominic West from The Wire is one of the handmaidens one of the guards for Amidala, and so is Colin Hanks. If you look, he even has a line, and it's there's a lot of that kind of, guys that might go on to other things or have been other things, but it's no, well, you're only working a day. You're working a day. You're holding a plate of food that somebody takes an apple off of. Yeah,
and it's her other credits look mostly she's been a day player on British drama TV shows. So it's probably a similar gig.
It's considering all the, how they're going to be I assume they're casting a lot more people this time around than say the prequels.
Mm-hmm.
I was, those big, I'm trying to think of scenes where they have lots of people, and it's maybe the scene in Attack of the Clones when they're on the transport ship. It's there's dozens of people, but you never see any of them clearly.
Right. Yeah. and that's a good point. So I also, when I saw her, I was like, oh, maybe she's playing Mon Mothma, but again, the age wouldn't really line up. So someone suggested that given her cheekbones and everything, that she might be playing, some kind of imperial officer.
Again, making suppositions about cheekbones.
Yeah. But you make a good point, which is that, in the prequels, if you had big crowd scenes, like you had big crowd scenes, which would allow them to just do digital effects, or in the case of the pod race, paint some Q-tips and stick them in a little box. Whereas, these sequels seem like they'll be more. I guess there's the one shot of Starkiller Base that we've seen that's a big crowd scene, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those people in that were digital.
Oh yeah, that looks like a composite.
Yeah, but you'll also, I would imagine, have scenes on spaceships, on whatever the sequel trilogy version of a Star Destroyer is, or something else where. Closer to like the original trilogy, where you don't need that many people. You just need like maybe a dozen people standing around doing stuff. So you just hire some actors and stick them in a room, and you shoot this side of the thing, and then you turn around and shoot the other side of the set. So in that sense, we may the actual cast list itself might be a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we think that it's, someone being cast is a lot more special than it is. And I've been kind of watching that Project Greenlight thing, the Ben Affleck, Matt Damon thing about making movies or whatever. And it's amazing, how the concept of scheduling and hiring actors, it's just like, well, there's like that level of choices, and then you might get somebody, and then you find out like, oh, the part is so small,
right?
That it's almost like kind of hilarious to mention. It's it's like when they were they talked a lot about Benicio del Toro in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I would say that his role was very small and generally inconsequential. I know he's probably set up for something else in these other ones, and hopefully his episode 8, are we saying he's an 8, is going to be,
yes.
Like he's going to have, like, they're not going to just build it up and it'd be like I like him. And it's,
I mean, like we've said, unless it's going to be a thing where he's not in episode 8 much, but then has a bigger role in episode 9.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think of.
It's a total waste if you do. Because, I mean, I always think he has such an edge to him that I like, and it's kind of I'm going off on a thing, but that's don't is it Ryan Johnson?
Yeah,
we're talking about your girlfriend's books, so do us a solid and actually use it.
Yeah. So in slightly larger casting news, I believe it's Gugu Mbatha-Raw has been cast for episode 8. They don't know what role, or we don't know what role she's playing. I assume they know what role she's playing if they cast her. But
we'll just find a place
before they. I mean, that's possible too.
Yeah, you're right. It is,
because before that we had heard that they were going to be casting for at least 2 new roles for women, and that Olivia Cook, Tatiana Maslany, and Gina Rodriguez were reading scenes with John Boyega. But then in addition to that, there was this other role. I don't think this is the same role that they cast Mbatha-Raw for. So, it could be that they just wanted to hire some people who they thought would be good and then figure it out later. That rarely is how it works, but you never know. What's interesting about them casting her, I think, is that Claudia Gray, who wrote Lost Stars, right when the book came out, she had posted some, like her dream cast. If they were going to make Lost Stars into a movie, who her dream cast would be. She was posting that on her Pinterest board. And this actress, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, was her choice to play Sienna, the female lead from Lost Stars. And she's too young to be playing Sienna in episode 8.
Right.
Because if Sienna's like in her 20s early to mid 20s around the Battle of Endor. 30 years later, she'd probably be 55, 60. And
she's the one that kind of looked like the picture that I keep seeing of her is this kind of thing where she kind of looks, got her hair slicked back and all that stuff.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But, so given that, though, I wonder if we're going to see some speculation about, and since Lost Stars was part of Journey to the Force Awakens, if there's going to be a connection between her character and Lost Stars.
Well, that's the kind of that I don't know where I read this, or maybe this was in your notes, is that they were saying that, like, a lot of people are, after these movies, after the first movie comes out, people are going to go running back to those books because there's all kinds of clues to the state of the galaxy.
Yeah, this was at Comicon. Okay. Pablo Hidalgo.
I'm getting ahead
saying this. Yeah. I mean, no, we can say that at least. Yeah, so Pablo Hidalgo, we'll talk more about the Comic-Con stuff, but Pablo Hidalgo from the Lucasfilm Story Group at Comic-Con last week, or over the weekend, I guess, was saying that, a year from now, so, after Episode 7 comes out and people have seen it a couple times, he thinks that people will want to go back and read all of the Journey to the Force Awakens books again because they put little... hidden clues in there that when people reread them, they'll be rewarded for sort of recognizing, it's that character.
Now, if I find it, now if they go like, oh yeah, that armor they found, that was Boba Fett, and be like, oh yeah, thanks.
Right.
It's like, wait a second.
Yeah. And then the other bit of casting, this is still at the rumor stage, but they are allegedly, I say allegedly like this is a crime or something. I don't know. Apparently,
you sound like Star Jones.
They're looking at the actor Michael B. Jordan to play Boba Fett in the upcoming, at least for right now, still upcoming Boba Fett movie. So Michael B. Jordan is Johnny Storm in the new Fantastic Four movies. He played Oscar Grant in Fruitvale Station. He was on Parenthood.
Friday Night Lights.
He's in the Creed movie that's coming out.
Oh, I haven't watched
the boxing movie. So, he's got stuff going on for himself at the moment. And so it makes sense that they would, I guess, look at him. It's interesting, though, if they do that, then that means that Boba Fett is clearly dead, or the original Boba Fett is clearly dead, and that the name Boba Fett then just becomes like passed along to whoever is wearing that particular armor. And it also means then that they would have to address, that fact of it, if not in this movie, then, in some book, or, I could see them doing like a Boba Fett comic miniseries, or even, its own title that sort of to help, if not explain how Boba Fett died, at least say like, all right, well, I know we're moving on and saying this other guy's Boba Fett now, so here's this comic book for people who like the.
Oh, I mean, that has to be. Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. I was going to say can't put
Daniel Logan Boba Fett. Let's give them this comic book to satisfy them while we move on with this character in other ways.
Well, first I like Michael B. Jordan, so that's fine with that. I don't have any problem with that. Although he's going to have to wear for it to be a thing, he's got to wear that mask a lot. It's like that's the thing. Like if they hire, I mean, if they hire someone like, not even Michael B. Jordan himself, but someone like him, he's getting a lot of work and people recognize the name now. That means necessarily that, I don't know that he would want to do that movie if he just had to keep the helmet on the entire time, because then it's like, well, you can just get whomever, Yeah, it's kind of one of. Are they? I mean, if they're trying to rebuild the mythology of Boba Fett, because I know, I mean, I've heard on other podcasts that one of the Lawrence Kasdan was really annoyed with how Boba Fett went out in Jedi, and he's been trying to figure out a way to fix that for a long time. I mean, a Michael B. Jordan Boba Fett movie means that has to take place, you know, post Jedi, but
Right.
not necessarily, not necessarily post Force Awakens. Because I mean, if he's been around for 30 years,
I guess it could take place almost any time post Jedi.
I mean, if that's the way they're going, that's the way they're going. Part of me really likes the idea of, a consistency of a heavily scarred, like a one-eyed, gray-haired Tamora Morrison, with a robot arm and a bad attitude, gunning for Han Solo for 30 years and having it, or something like that. I mean, I get the feeling that this whole Boba Fett thing is going to be like Rogue One, where it's all behind the scenes movies, where it's like they're only going to inform the big episodes. They're not going to define them, kind of idea, where it's like, it's not going to, something happening in Rogue One isn't going to change. It might change your understanding of A New Hope, but it's not going to, it's not going to change that.
It's not going to change like the plot of A New Hope.
Right. So, I know, like, see, Kazan, he wants to do that kind of the man with no name kind of concept of Boba Fett. And then, of course, yeah, I mean, Daniel Logan, I really didn't enjoy him in that character in the Clone Wars as just this kind of, like, frowny little kid stomping around. I mean, I don't think that was his fault, though. No, that's not his fault at all. That's just a weird way of approaching that. It's like they almost kind of rub salt in the wound of like not doing that character right justice or whatever, or not even coming back and having him in episode 3 at some point. Right. But it's interesting. I mean, you're almost falling into kind of like a Spider-Man kind of idea, where it's, we're starting to have to get the use every couple of years somebody different's going to be playing this character. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I'm kind of fine with that, or at least I'm more okay with that than I might have expected, or I'm more okay with that than I might have been like 2 decades ago. You're never going to get. They can never, because that's such a common thing in comic books now. I think a lot of people are sort of used to that idea and know that, like, okay, well, even if I don't like this version of Spider-Man, or if I don't like this version of, a superhero, like, there's this other different version that I can just read those, and that will be my Spider-Man. Like, that's who Spider-Man is to me. That's fine. So yeah, and that's why I was saying, I think if they go this route, it is. I would not be surprised then to see, a Boba Fett comic that takes place, in the years between episodes 3 and 5, and learning more about what Boba Fett was up to around that period of time. Yeah, I mean, it just makes you wonder if the character itself could sustain. That's the whole thing. There has to be a question. So if Michael B. Jordan is playing, like, whatever guy he is before he puts on that armor, is that what's going to be about that story that's going to captivate us for 2 hours, that we want to see? Does he get the suit at the end? Has he had it for a while? What's this guy's story? It's not one of those things where throwing on the suit gives you something that it's not the mask. It doesn't change you, or whatever. It's like you can't just put on the costume and then take on the mantle of all the other Boba Fetts. So it'll be interesting, like, in the script area, about, like, how are we going to make this story interesting? You can't just have Michael B. Jordan doing Boba Fett-y type things, Mm-hmm. It is interesting that just the last comment about Battlefront is that I guess somebody found in the code to the game on their PC, because I think they were doing an open PC thing. They've actually found like some Tamora Morrison Boba Fett dialogue for the Battle of Jakku add-on, which, I wouldn't take that as canon or anything, but that's a thing. He still, that's a situation where they still have a relationship with Tamora Morrison, and they in some instances, people are, even in the video game world, they're still considering him Boba Fett. So,
yeah, the other piece of that that I thought was interesting, and this was in one of the articles about it, was that there was a suggestion that that the Lucasfilm story group has maybe had a harder time nailing down the Boba Fett story. That one of the reasons there's been a delay, like they took Josh Trank off the movie, but then they didn't just say like, oh, and we have this other director who we hired, 2 months later, and so the movie's going forward. Like it's still in this very precarious sort of tentative state. In part, perhaps because the story group has had a harder time nailing down the Boba Fett story because he's a villain, and they're still trying to get around the idea of how do you craft a movie where your protagonist is the villain, or your main character is this like bad guy, this bounty hunter, he sort of he's a villain,
right?
And I understand that, especially if you're making a Star Wars movie that's ostensibly for people of all ages. But I wonder if they even need to, like, I feel like we've had enough movies that have dealt with that they have enough templates that they could take from. Like, I was thinking of the Predator movies, and specifically Predator 2, where, you have Boba Fett, but then you have this other kind of main character who somehow comes across Boba Fett and starts chasing her, is investigating a thing and runs into Boba Fett, and or Boba Fett has to hunt this person, this other main character, and do you still get to see Boba Fett doing all kinds of cool stuff and being Boba Fett, but the character that you identify with, or that is there for the audience, is this other main character. The question there then would be, do you make that someone like Han Solo or Lando, who even casual fans are like, oh yeah, of course I know that character, like, yeah, I'll see Lando versus Boba Fett movie? Or do you create a new character, completely new, and just sort of develop that character over the course of the movie? Or I guess another option would then to bring in someone that you've already sort of created in this new canon era, who the broader audience might not be familiar with, but who diehard Star Wars fans are, and you would essentially, it wouldn't be that different from just creating a new character from scratch, because you would still have to do a lot of character development within the movie for the people who don't know who this person is.
Right, and you'd have.
I think stuff like that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you just have, and to do that, you'd actually have to dip back into the EU that they've already spent a year telling us doesn't matter.
Maybe. I don't know that they have to do that. At some point between now and whenever that movie comes out, we could get a short story or a novel or something set in that period of time that who you're like, oh, let's just make that person interact with Boba Fett. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of the EU characters, I don't think.
True. But also, if they go that Michael B. Jordan route, they don't and break from existing the idea that there is a galaxy of people that, I don't know when this is set, but at some point there's a lot of people that share a lot of genetic similarities to Jango Fett.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing inherent saying that, well, the Michael B. Jordan thing has to be a villain. It's like he could just be he could just be a bounty hunter. He's just a guy trying to make a buck in the world of where there's criminality and if it's the Empire, the Empire may not be too hot to be like trying to solve the problems of the Hutts, or if it's the New Republic, if it's the, what do they call it, the Resistance era, maybe there's,
right.
yeah, maybe there's things that happen occasionally that like, well, we need to hire a professional, and then we go, well, let's hire Boba Fett, that kind of idea. So he doesn't have to necessarily be evil.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is that the Boba Fett of The Empire Strikes Back, he's literally just hired to do a job.
Yeah.
He's a business guy. And then they kind of, like I say, they make him cartoonish in Jedi, and then Jango Fett, it's like he's kind of one of those situations where he's like, I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe. But even he doesn't believe that at that point, because he just has that smug attitude where he kind of knows, right. Jango kind of knows he's up to no good. He's, I don't know. It is a kind of opportunity if they go with a well-known actor with a personality, that they could essentially adjust, the moral scope of the character.
Yeah. I mean, because then in the what are now legends, right, the character was imbued with this, he's had this long rivalry or feud with Han Solo, which is why he wanted to make sure he was so good at capturing Han Solo. There was a personal element of it for him. But it seems like now, and I think we've talked about this, what they're doing now with the canon is a lot of that stuff that initially was sort of attributed to Han Solo in the legends, like they're parceling a lot of that out to the other characters, and especially like Luke now has had a fight with Boba Fett, and he hasn't really interacted or intersected with Han Solo at all yet.
Right. So should we get into some of this Comic-Con stuff?
Yeah, we should. So Comic-Con was over the weekend. We've been talking a little bit about some stuff that came out in the news around then, I think, is, to help build excitement. But there are a couple of, I guess there were 2 or 3 really big pieces of Comic-Con for Star Wars folks. One is Rebels. There's a new trailer that came out either right before or right at the beginning of Comic-Con, and then a panel about season 2 of Rebels. And then there was a panel on publishing and the Del Rey sort of Star Wars line that's coming out soon. And then we also found out about some more comics news. So, I mean, I guess we've already mentioned it, some of the Del Rey stuff. So I guess we can start there. And so Pablo Hidalgo, again, from the Lucas Story Group, was there at the panel and was talking about sort of what the Story Group's involvement in this publishing side of things has been, and connecting the publishing and the books to The Force Awakens. And he says that once they finally set the story for what Episode 7 was going to be, then the Story Group went back and mapped out sort of, okay, how did we get from Episode 6 to Episode 7? And that the story is the most solid right after Episode 6, when we're getting stuff like Shattered Empire and Aftermath and everything. And then right before Episode 7, which is, I guess, when a lot of this other Journey to the Force Awakens stuff might be happening. Some of the other, young reader books, or at least the Leia one. They're starting out. They have these wraparound stories of, Leia's droid. Oh, tell me about the time you did this, and then she tells him a story. But he also said that process, it was based on notes from George Lucas, the early script that Michael Arndt wrote for The Force Awakens, which had a lot of kind of world building stuff in it, and then for where Rian Johnson wanted to take Episode 8. And that those 3 things were sort of the building blocks for how they developed the story between Return of the Jedi and then The Force Awakens, which I thought was really interesting, in part because it's, Lucas, as part of the deal where he sold off Lucasfilm to Disney, he got to pitch his idea for Episode 7, and the Kathleen Kennedy was like, thank you, but I think we're going to go in a different direction. But it sounds like, they didn't throw all of that out. entirely, in that, okay, well, maybe there's some stuff in here that would work, and let's use that in this way, and take maybe whatever the parts that would work in a movie and put them in the movie, but not use the stuff that just doesn't fit, which, I mean, honestly, is encouraging to me, because that's exactly what George Lucas always needed for his movies and for Star Wars stuff, is he needed someone to tell him that, and he needed to figure that out, either, I guess, have someone tell him that or figure that out for himself. And so if that's sort of how the process for making these next set of movies, or at least some of the stories that we're going to get soon, like that, good, then that's probably right about where they should be.
Right. Yeah, it's, I always wonder when it finally comes out what Lucas's take on it will be, because he'll probably find out there was a lot more that they used out of his idea than he thinks.
Right.
I mean, I know a lot of the what they said about the rumor is that he kind of wanted to take it in a direction of like teen Skywalker type ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that Kennedy had felt, and Iger had thought, it was a little too close to the Phantom Menace idea and the young Anakin and the
Right.
teenage Anakin, and it didn't do well. Although you could say that Lucas wasn't completely in a vacuum with that idea, because at least when that idea was being sold, I mean, what was the number one genre type picture? It was always about, it was like Hunger Games, and I mean that.
It was not long after the Twilight movies.
Right. It is teenagers, being, it is the destiny. Now, I would say that you could make a pretty strong argument that whole genre has kind of run its course, and that people are getting, tired of maze runners and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. And so it's kind of, it's gonna, after that last Hunger Game comes out or whatever, people will be kind of like, all right, we're kind of done with these teenagers that were tasked with being the only hope kind of idea. So maybe it was smart. It wasn't dumb of him to suggest it, but it was probably smart of Lucasfilm to say, by the time we get done promoting this stuff and ready, I'm not going to be the person that brings out a teenage action movie in 2015, 18 months after that genre is kind of dead.
Right. So another piece to this was, I guess Greg Rucka was there, who's writing Shattered Empire, and he says Shattered Empire #4, which is going to be the last issue of that miniseries, is basically going to be like a love letter to Luke, and he compares, at least the way he is writing post Return of the Jedi Luke, to Qui-Gon from Phantom Menace, and this idea of sort of being serene and being at peace. He talked about, a big thing that he was drawn to was, that battle, that, sword fight between Darth Maul and then Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan at the end of the Phantom Menace, and how, Qui-Gon would just sit and meditate in between the doors opening and closing. And for Luke, at this point, he's the only Jedi in the galaxy, and he's sort of aware of that, and he's at peace with it, which is certainly different, I think, than the Legends, where he knew that he was the only Jedi, but there is this undercurrent of like nervousness, and like he was overworking himself to try to build up this new Jedi temple or whatever, and maybe we'll get that eventually when we get closer to like episodes 8 and 9. But we'll see where they take that idea after Shattered Empire. But I thought just that comparison was sort of an interesting one. Yeah,
it's like, and also, what about Yoda saying, "Pass on what you've learned,"
Right.
But I think that's
right. I mean, Shattered Empire is like immediately after Endor, so maybe he just hasn't had the time yet. But
yeah, and also, like I said, spoiler alert, there has been some insinuation or whatever. I heard some rumor that part of Luke's the mystery of where is Luke Skywalker has a lot to do with the idea of, his being a powerful Jedi and being the descendant of, finding out that, he's essentially he's not essentially, but he's the descendant of Darth Vader, and you could make an argument if you read between the lines that he's the descendant of the Emperor, and he's.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I never knew if they ever completely, if that was exactly what they're, that's like, it's kind of like that thing you find out in like one of the Dune books that, that Lady Jessica is actually the daughter of Baron Harkonnen, and so therefore Paul is actually the grandson of Harkonnen, and it's kind of like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Which I think that was in Children of Dune, but
yeah, I mean, I guess that, given that how much sort of intermarrying between the royalty, right before World War One, it's not an unprecedented idea, but
that is true.
It's a little. I think a lot of people would say, "Wait a minute, wait." Was that really necessary?
Yeah, I always loved that joke that Hamill used to say when he'd be on like the talk show circuit, where he'd make a thing where he thought that by the third movie that it was going to like, well, okay, Leia's your sister. Oh, and Boba Fett's your mother. Like she was going to take off her helmet, and that was going to be the big reveal. And maybe the big reveal, the era of big reveals are probably over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in addition to that, we got some news that we're going to get a bunch more short stories down the road, and then some novels as well. So on the short story front, and this is a little confusing to me because I first was picking this up off of people's Twitter feeds that were live blogging this panel, but then some articles followed up, and the articles said different things about who these characters would be and where these things would be published. But what we do know is that so if you go back to that spread in Vanity Fair of that kind of panorama of all of the characters from Maz Kanata's castle, there's one that kind of looks like Harley Quinn. She's a woman in black, sort of sitting on this larger alien's lap. So that character is apparently named Bazine, and there's going to be a short story about her coming out online in November, written by Delilah Dawson. The story is going to be called The Perfect Weapon. And then Alan Dean Foster, who wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then is writing the novelization for The Force Awakens. He's also going to write a short story about the character on whose lap Bazine is sitting, called the character is called the Grungar, and the short story will be called Bait.
I like that. The Grungar.
It's the Grunger. I can't. It wasn't clear to me where that story is going to be published, whether it was going to be an Insider or somewhere else. And then in addition to that, we are getting an anthology of short stories by Landry Walker, focusing on some of the other characters from that shot, of those other aliens from and other characters from Maz Kanata's castle. I think the book is going to be called Star Wars Tales from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. And it will include stories called High Noon on Jakku, Face of Evil, All Creatures Great and Small, and then The Crimson Corsair and the Lost Treasure of Count Dooku. And the Crimson Corsair is that character, the red helmet that kind of flares out, and he's got a black and red on, and then in the behind-the-scenes video, they show him close up, and he opens his mouth, and there's like this metallic sound that I love so much. That's who the Crimson Corsair is, apparently. These stories might be like young adult stories, or at least for younger readers. That was not clear to me. I didn't think so initially, but then something else I read suggested as much. And they're all going to be sort of in different styles. So High Noon on Jakku, as you might imagine, is going to be sort of a Western, and you know, they're going to sort of each take on slightly different genres. But it's interesting to me, and I guess I can't remember when that's coming out, but it does seem like they're sort of getting out ahead of the movie and setting a lot of this stuff out. Whereas, you know, with the EU, the tales from Jabba's palace and the tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, those hit in the 90s, and those were based on, some of them were based on like fan fiction that people had been posting online and things. And that, I mean, but those anthologies really were influential in sort of setting out a lot of what subsequently came up in the EU, and some of the plots and some of the characters, and sort of what the story was of where that universe went. And now it seems like they're centralizing that a lot more, and they're exercising a lot more control over that sort of ahead of time. And I think it's a sign that the Lucas Story Group is sort of keeping a tighter rein on organizing these things and making sure that stuff doesn't contradict each other right out of the gate, which would seem to be a positive development. I don't know, aspiring authors might complain that that's like stifling creativity or whatever. I don't know. But it certainly seems like in setting a lot of this stuff out ahead of time that they are saying, all right, these are who these characters are. We know the backstories to all these characters because we made it up, and we're going to let you in on it, rather than, some author coming to us and saying, hey, I want to write a story about that Harley Quinn looking lady, and then just saying like, yeah, as long as you don't directly contradict the movie, you can do whatever you want. Right.
Yeah, I was a big fan of those, like, especially Tales from Jabba's Palace. I thought that was...
Yeah, I think that was probably the best.
That was the high end of that one. I mean, Cantina was good, but I honestly thought that there was a kind of an interconnected, almost because it was the mid-90s, and everything was Quentin Tarantino influenced, and that's probably the closest to a Quentin Tarantino influenced Star Wars ever had, where there was a kind of a interconnected, like Gortog the Gamorrean was one of my favorites. He was kind of he was a bumbling Gamorrean guard, pig guard as the parlance of the 80s. And I think a lot of it's he has his own story, and then he appears in a few other ones, and a lot of it is the fact that he's dragging around a dead body most of the time because he's trying to solve a murder.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, that one was a fun one.
The whole success of this really basically has a lot to do with how much the Maz Kanata's castle and the minions or whatever I don't want to say minions. Forget I ever said minions. Lackeys, crew, team. How much the people, the inhabitants of Maz Kanata's castle, I mean, how excited, how much that kind of fires the imagination of fans. It's one of the things, if it's a thing where it's like, meh, it was all right. That sequence was like, meh, it didn't really wow us or anything like that. Then, committing to like a 5 short story book might be like, whatever. But if it's one of those things where you walk away from it and you go, oh, I really wish I knew more about what was going on there. It's that balance. It's to inform the story, and it's like it's like in the Mad Max movie when they get to the bogs and there are those things on the stilts. Everybody's like, I heard everybody like, I want to hear all about those stilts, those stilt people. Although, I think it would probably ruin it to hear it. But, Star Wars has that great idea, that great tradition that they didn't do a great job of in the prequels, of having kind of having aspects of the, like, presenting a scene and having you leave wanting more.
Right.
And I think that's going to have a lot to do with how well those books are, how interested I'm going to be in them, at least.
Well, and honestly, it'll have to do with how well or how good Maz Kanata looks, right? And how interesting that character is. Because, there will be some fans who, even if that the motion capture character, the main character of that scene, that's whose castle it is, if that character doesn't work, there will still be fans who say like, well, but I still like all the other aliens, and I like that Vanity Fair thing, so I'll read the book. But in terms of making that scene successful in the context of the movie, yeah, having these extra characters, they certainly look good, and having them populate the background is going to help. But if it's like in Return of the Jedi, if Jabba the Hutt didn't really work, then that whole scene wasn't going to work. But they made Jabba the Hutt work, and that's why the rest of it became more interesting. At least that's what I would argue anyway. The anthology will probably do okay. And I do appreciate that they're sort of keeping the Tales from format for the title. They're probably going to run out of those eventually. Right. So they're already making it like very, very vague, and Tales from the galaxy far, far away. And they can't go back and do Tales from the New Republic because they've already done that.
Like Tales from the movie you just saw.
Yeah. So I guess they couldn't call it Tales from Maz Kanata's Castle because for the most part, the people who weren't really paying attention to the movie yet, like that's not going to register with them. So.
Yeah, and it's it also sounds like a theme restaurant. Maz Kanata's Castle, where kids get free ice cream on their birthday.
But only if you say the special phrase.
Yeah. You have to say the phrase it pays, and it's that Crimson Corsair sound.
Yeah. So in addition to these short stories, we're also getting some novels. Of course, Aftermath, we knew was going to be a trilogy. So the second book of that trilogy will be called Life Debt, and that's coming summer 2016. And then the last book of that trilogy, which would make it the third book, is going to be called Empire's End. And at one point during this panel, Hidalgo also said that the Battle of Jakku, the story of the Battle of Jakku, will be told in print in addition to people seeing it in Battlefront. And so my guess that, based on what I read in Lost Stars, my guess is that Empire's End will include the Battle of Jakku. I think given the timeline that Lost Stars sort of sets out or hints at of how long it was between Battle of Endor and the Battle of Jakku, I think that would probably be about right for that to be, and that would also obviously provide like a big climax to the trilogy,
right?
So
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, and then in addition to those, Claudia Gray, who wrote Lost Stars, is working on another Star Wars book. This is Star Wars: New Republic Bloodlines.
Oh, all those colons! You love all those colons.
I know. Journey to the Force Awakens, Star Wars, New Republic, Bloodlines. No, and so this book is going to take place 6 years prior to the Force Awakens, and the fact that it's New Republic Bloodlines makes me wonder if we're going to get a series of New Republic novels, either written by Gray or written by they don't necessarily have to be connected. I guess they could all just sort of take place in that particular period of time. But that could be interesting as well. That's a complete guess on my part, based on the formatting of the book title. But yeah. I thought that was interesting. And the Lost Stars is very well written. She's a good writer, so that's encouraging. I'm curious to see if the other two books of this Aftermath trilogy will follow the first one stylistically. I assume they will be, because that appears to be Chuck Wendig's kind of thing that he does. My hope is that they're edited a little better so that they read a little cleaner, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it was written in a rushed way. But I guess we'll find out in the summer of 2016.
Yeah, I'm hoping that by that time the movie will have informed this enough where then I can feel like I care a little bit more about what's going on. That was my problem. I just, it's like all those, they tell you, it's like, first I thought, I've got 20 years of EU, and then they throw that all out just for them to kind of, I know they're doing it because they really want to save, the big characters for what they've been doing for 30 years. They really want to save them for the movie because they don't want to kind of show you the dessert. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of painful. It's like, it takes so long. I'm like, I want to consume Star Wars, but I don't. These side steps, just for something about it, I need the meat and potatoes of the characters, especially. And
that is something Hidalgo said, that after The Force Awakens comes out, we'll be getting more stories about, Luke and Leia and Han. So I don't know when they will be published because he didn't announce them, and I haven't heard of other things in the pike, but we are eventually going to get more stories that focus on what they were doing in that 30-year span between episode 6 and 7.
So I guess we should cover some of this Rebel stuff and then think about wrapping it up.
Yeah. So I guess we'll cover. The only other publishing thing I would say is that there's going to be another 5-issue comic miniseries, which I don't think have been super successful, but they seem to, like using that format. So there's going to be one called Obi-Wan and Anakin that comes out, or at least that starts in January of 2016. It's the guy who wrote the Lando comic miniseries, and then the artist from Shattered Empire. It takes place 3-ish years after the Phantom Menace, so Anakin is like 12 or 13 at this point, and it's him and Obi-Wan that are sent to an abandoned planet. And according to an interview with the author, it's sort of like a samurai movie mixed with a police procedural. It's kind of stylistically what he was going for, but then the planet that they're sent to has something of like a post-apocalyptic / steampunk look, which I know there are people who like steampunk, but I am not one of those people.
I am not either.
I am also not sure how that really works with Star Wars.
Honestly, that sounds. Your description makes it sound like that they're like, oh, it's a prequel era story, so it's just like, let's throw whatever shit against the wall and see if it sticks. Like, oh, are they gonna run into unicorns and vampires and eat bacon at the end of it too? It's just kind of like, I have to. And honestly, I'm completely.
Well, and when I think of.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I thought you dropped out. No, I was just gonna say I'm just completely done with. I'm just really done with that relationship. Kind of the Anakin Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the difference is that this is right because we had 6 years of the Clone Wars. Whereas this is sort of taking place in a time period that wasn't really explored that much. I guess there might have been 1 or 2 novels that covered this period where Anakin was still kind of young, but
Greg Bear
not
wrote,
that much. And
Greg
so
Bear wrote something.
That's like the twist. Yeah, that's like the twist to it is that Anakin's younger now, and they're not quite friends and brothers yet. They don't have that relationship yet. So I don't know. I mean, when I think of like steampunk, I think of like brass and leather and wood stuff, which none of those materials have ever really been that have really played a big part in design and the art and production design in any of the Star Wars stuff, or even in the books or the novels or books or novels, the novels or the comic books or anything like that. And so, yeah, I get that it's a new look, but I don't know how Star Warsy it will seem.
Yeah,
I guess there's a right way to do it, or what was that quote I gave it a while ago? It's David Fincher, I think, talking about how to set up a shot. It's like there are like a million ways to set up a shot, but at the end of the day, there are only 2, and one of them is wrong. Right. So there's like a million wrong ways to do it, and only one right way, really. So we'll see how that ends up. But anyway, so Rebels. So we got a new trailer for season 2. And I like this trailer a lot better than I did the previous. I guess it was more like a teaser, or the thing that focused more on the new clone troopers. This one focused a little more on the Inquisitors, and I think gave a better sense of other aspects of the season beyond like, oh, they meet clone troopers. Your favorite clones are back from the Clone Wars.
Right.
It brought the Interdictors into the new canon era. These were ships that I think Zahn might have come up with, or maybe it was Kevin Anderson. I don't know.
No,
but basically they look like Star Destroyers, but they're meant to pull ships out of hyperspace. So those are in the new canon now. So that's kind of fun. Yeah. There's at least one episode, it looks like, where the Inquisitors are going after Force-sensitive children. Which I think there was like a Clone Wars episode kind of like that, if I remember, where like little kids were being kidnapped.
I forget.
Ezra's parents may still be alive. or at least he has a vision where they're still alive. And then kind of one of the bigger things is that, Sabine, as we mentioned last week, Sabine sort of gets her own episode and backstory, and it looks like she goes back to Mandalore, and there's a new character, a bounty hunter, who knows her in some capacity, and my guess is that it's her mother. It's either her mother or like an aunt or a sister, but it could also be like a childhood friend. Sabine in the clip from the trailer, she refers to herself as being from Clan Vizsla, which is a Clone Wars reference. Right. They did some stuff with Mandalore, and they so Mandalore in the Clone Wars was this peaceful planet, but then there's this group that opposed the pacifist government, and the group was called Death Watch, and so Pre-Vizsla was the leader of Death Watch. So Sabine is related to that group in some capacity. But I don't think it was at Comic-Con. I think it was in an maybe it was at Comic-Con. He basically compared this line to something from A New Hope, where Luke goes like, "Oh, my father fought in the Clone Wars," and Obi-Wan was like, "Yeah." And eventually we find out there's this huge whole backstory to that, but it's just a line that's just there in the movie. And so it sounds like it's similar in Rebels, where it's not really that important to the scene itself. It's just part of that ritual that Sabine's engaging in the show, and so she just has to say it. At the panel, we also heard that the uniforms for the Inquisitors, the Inquisitors themselves, I should say, are going to play a big role in season 2, because the Grand Inquisitor is dead, and so the show, I think, is going to focus on these two, fifth brother and seventh sister. But there will be others that we don't see, and they're all sort of jockeying for position, competing with one another to become the next Grand Inquisitor, to impress Darth Vader and be able to take the Grand Inquisitor's job. And so the fifth brother, we found out yesterday, he's voiced by an actor named Philip Anthony Rodriguez, who I'm not familiar with his work. He's done some video game voice acting. He was on Grimm. He was on Secret Life of American Teenager. That seems like his biggest credits. The Inquisitor's uniforms are based on old Ralph McQuarrie designs for Tusken Raiders at one point. And then in all the trailers that we've seen for Rebels so far, the footage has really only come from the first half of the season. So it's sort of like with The Force Awakens, we're like, oh, it's only from the first act. We haven't seen anything of Rebels yet from the second half of the season. So that's kind of exciting, and see where that goes.
Yeah, it should be. I think it looks like they're really geared up to take this in a really fun direction. I mean, having some real, to the point where you might actually care about. At least it's hard for me to care about characters in something like this, and then it's like seeing that they are really putting in a lot of time and effort. And it's not like the Clone Wars, where I always felt the Clone Wars had this issue of like, well, how it's going to end. They're going to fight, and he's going to turn into Darth Vader. So everything felt like insubstantial. Whereas, everybody's assuming that these characters are going to be dead by the end of it. Now, there's no indicators that that's where it's going to go. They do have a story, and it's going to keep going on, and there'll actually be some real suspense for once.
Yeah. And I guess the first episode airs tomorrow on Disney XD. So,
oh really?
That's exciting. I guess at Comic-Con they showed the first couple episodes, and now they're going to actually start airing on TV. So, yeah, I mean, right, there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it, and we'll see what happens. And the times that I've been dissatisfied with Rebels so far, it's never been like the story. It's more, you could call this nitpicking, but it's been more sort of like the dialogue and some of the writing. So if the writing matches, I guess, what Filoni seems like he's doing with the show and what he wants to do with the show, I think it could be really, really good. But the writing needs to be up to snuff. And then also, I guess they need to promote the show, because this was from several hours ago now that we were talking about this, but that CNBC article about rebooting the the video games. They mentioned some like mobile game for Star Wars Rebels that I don't have any recollection of at all. Like I don't even remember hearing about it or reading about it. So I don't know if that's because I don't know if that's just because the game wasn't good or because they just don't do a great job promoting.
Or maybe the writer got confused and thought that the
No, there was one. I looked it up and it was
okay.
called Rebels Recon. But I just don't remember hearing anything about that game.
I know this is this note was the first time I'd even heard about it.
So I think part of it could be that the game wasn't that good, but part of it could just be that I don't think they promote the show that much or very well.
I wonder if they're worried that they're going to confuse people, because like when we start talking about stuff, even I have to like take a second and like think about like when I make speculations, and I'm like I have to think about timelines and like what what era is this? Is this post? This is post Revenge of the Sith, but pre New Hope, and then it's like, so maybe they're worried that they're going to confuse people by over promoting it, that they'll think that this is like the Journey to the Force Awakens type thing rather than operating in a really essentially a different galaxy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I want to give viewers and even, kids who watch it on Disney Channel or Disney XD, like I want to give them some credit. They can probably manage that. The fact that, this takes place, they know when it takes place roughly. I just don't know if the show hasn't resonated and that's why they're not promoting it much, or if, they just want it to sort of slowly build an audience because they're worried that, before the movie, they were worried that if so we're doing a new Star Wars thing, people would go like, oh, I didn't really like prequels. I didn't really like the Clone Wars. Like I've never heard of any of these characters. Cause that's the other thing too, is at least with the Clone Wars, there were characters that you had heard of before. There was Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker and whatever. Whereas this, like they're, other than Vader and Tarkin, I mean, they're creating all of these other characters themselves. These are wholly new characters, so that could be it too, that there's the public just doesn't, they don't know who these characters are, and so promoting it as like, oh hey, here's Sabine from Rebels, you're gonna be like, I don't know who that is. Is she related to Boba Fett or not? Or
exactly. Well, I'm gonna keep an eye out for that, because it's kind of like I said, that Disney XD app's a pain in the butt, but the things I do for Star Wars. So I think that's all we got for this week. Would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a lot, but
we got a lot more stuff to talk about next week. We have all the comic books that.
We were reading up on the comics, and we didn't even get to those.
So maybe I can actually read those Kanan comics.
Next week, of course, I guess we can talk about the first Rebels episode.
Is Chewbacca going to be on by then?
Yeah.
The Chewbacca first issue,
maybe.
So, because I thought I almost bought one, and it turned out that it was the it was a Chewbacca from back in from 10 years ago or something. Like, whoops.
Yeah, no, there's something else coming out next week other than Shattered Empire. I just can't remember what it is.
So, like I said, you guys you can read some comics, and then you can follow along at home.
Yep.
You can. Hey, we'd love it if you'd send us a message if you have any questions or comments or whatever. You can. Probably the fastest way is to tweet at us at Talking Birdcast on the Twitter. We also have talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. We have a Tumblr at talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com. We're on Facebook. It's really I just kind of repost the episodes because it's Facebook and everybody hates Facebook now. So that's facebook.com/Talking Bird Podcast. And I think that's pretty much it. I want to thank you for listening.
Yeah.
If you're interested in giving us a positive review on iTunes, I'd appreciate it. We're kind of just hovering we haven't gotten any in a long time, and I'd appreciate upping our game a little bit in the review thing, but also it's kind of a pain in the ass writing reviews. So if you have it, I know I'm not mad. I ain't mad at you. But if you got the time, do the crime. For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
That's right.
And who have you been?
And I am John Llewellyn.
All right.
I have been John. I have been, and I will continue to be.
I have been and always shall be your friend. Thanks for listening.